Good morning and welcome to the Palace of Westminster in central London, where there is no Brexit happening. So Britain set itself on a path for a Brexit with a referendum 2 years and 9 months ago. A majority of 52% of those who voted, against a minority of 48% of those who voted to leave the European Union. And the British Prime Minister, Theresa May, in March 2017, chose to start that process by invoking what's called the Article 50 process. So that's been chugging on, and that should have ended on March the 29th, which is a fortnight ago. But Britain didn't leave the European Union on March the 29th, and that Brexit date was moved back from March the 29th to April the 12th. Well, today is Friday, April the 12th, and still no Brexit. And in fact, still no Brexit, but if you look around, still no protesters. This is the quietest day for protests from Remainers and Brexiteers, as they're called, the two separate camps who are arguing about whether Britain should be in or be out of the European Union. This is the quietest day for protests down here at Westminster since before Christmas. Normally, if we'd been down here yesterday or on Wednesday or earlier in the week, this railing would have been full of flags. European Union flags and British flags, all placed there by protesters, and behind that would be protesters, some of them with loud hailers, all wanting to get on television, because behind us is a whole bank of places where the media were filming and doing live reports on Brexit. So this week, the European Union and Britain decided that Brexit could now be put back until October the 31st. But there's a chance that it might not happen then. So how has that gone down in Britain, and what's the media talking about? Well, let's have a quick look at some of the newspapers that came out today. Down here, we've got, first one up is, this is the free newspaper Metro, and it doesn't even bother to put it on its front page. The front page here is about Julian Assange, which is a totally different story, and you have to get into page 7 before you actually find out anything about Brexit. Again, just like the lack of protesters, not having Brexit as the lead story on your newspaper is a very unusual thing, and hasn't really happened here in London, in Britain since sometime in January. Most of the front pages have been led by Brexit. It's the thing that people talk about all the time. So yeah, here we go. Let's have a look. This is page 7. It's a whole full page, but what they're talking about here is like, well, one of the reasons why there aren't any protesters is that this Palace of Westminster behind me is now empty. All the MPs have gone off for their Easter break, but when they come back, they'll certainly be talking about Brexit again. Here's a story here. No deal plans are put on ice in Whitehall. Whitehall is the kind of euphemism for government. So government has kind of ditched its ideas of having a no-deal Brexit, and it's actually sent about 6,000 civil servants that it deployed to carry out Brexit back to the departments that they came from. So that seems to tell you that the government thinks that certainly for the time being, Brexit isn't happening. And then down here is a story we'll certainly be talking about. Backbench Brexiteers beg for May to quit. So her own party, people in her own party who are all in favour of Brexit, are very keen on getting rid of Theresa May because she's failed to deliver Brexit on 2 occasions, and she's also brought her own agreed withdrawal agreement, which she negotiated with the European Union, to Parliament 3 times, and it's been rejected 3 times. She's talking about bringing it back again, but some of her own people are saying, we no longer have confidence in you and we want to get rid of you. Let's have a look at some of the other papers. Here's the Times. Will calls itself the newspaper of record. Again, the lead is Assange, but up here at the top, you can see Johnson holds talks with DUP as pressure increases on May. So that's quite a local political story about Brexit. Johnson is one of the leaders of the Brexit group. The DUP is a group of politicians in Northern Ireland who are supporting the government at the moment. And Johnson is a man who wants to take over from May. So once again, the Times there has that story about what's going to happen to Theresa May. So we'll be talking about that in a minute too. One of the other papers here is The Guardian. And again, they've chosen to go for this Julian Assange story. But next to it here is how £1.5 billion was, let's see if we can get that a bit clearer for you, was wasted on planning for a no deal. And that's kind of what I was referring to beforehand when I was talking about 6,000 civil servants being sent back to the departments that they came from. So to deploy them to cover Brexit and to be ready to deal with Brexit when it happens has cost So the newspaper says £1.5 billion, but at the moment there's actually nothing to show for it. And here's a final paper. This is the Financial Times. And again, this is the top half of the paper, and you can see they've gone for that story about Julian Assange, which is happening just around the corner at Westminster Magistrates Court. And you have to turn the page, get to the bottom of the page before you get anything on Brexit. And you've got May pins Brexit hopes on Labour as no deal preparation winds down. So one of the reasons why they're going on that is that the opposition party, Labour, is in negotiation with the Prime Minister, Theresa May, about reaching an agreement between each other about what kind of Brexit deal they can have, which means that maybe Theresa May's withdrawal agreement that she agreed with the European Union might not go ahead, and then we'll get some kind of different Brexit, probably something that's softer. There's even a chance that we might not get a Brexit at all, which is pretty much the situation we were in back in December. And back in December, we had along with us as a guest to talk to us Dr. Alan Wager, who's with us again now. This is the fifth time that we've talked about Brexit since December, and it's now the middle of April, so it's about 4 months. Alan, have we got any further with Brexit? We did talk back in December about it, and all the various different options of Brexit were there. Exit without a deal, Brexit with an agreement, some kind of softer Brexit, or even indeed no Brexit at all. Are all those things still on the table?
I think Brexit is probably further away than it's ever been since we've been talking for the last few months. We've now got another 6 months until the new deadline for the UK, and we're increasingly see people talking about maybe there's a possibility of reversing the whole thing and not having Brexit at all, as we get further and further and further, month by month, away from the original decision in the referendum back in June 2016, 3 years ago almost. It becomes increasingly easier for these people that are against Brexit at all to campaign for another referendum. I think we're seeing an increasing move, and that's why we're seeing, for example, no deal planning from the government, as you said, going down the drain as well. So it's an increasingly difficult picture for those Brexiteers who voted to leave the European Union and voted for Brexit 3 years ago.
And so, what are the prospects for Theresa May? I mean, she's negotiated a deal that's taken two and a bit years to negotiate a deal with the European Union. It's called the Withdrawal Agreement. It's backed up by a political declaration. The European leaders are happy with that, and although she isn't happy with it, it's one she's championed. She does have support in the House of Commons for it. What's the story behind that? I mean, she started off with quite a heavy defeat. In fact, the worst defeat that any Prime Minister has ever suffered with a bill in the House of Commons. Then she brought it back again, suffered another smaller defeat, but still a very big one, and then brought it again and suffered a further third defeat by about 60 or 70 MPs. That's still quite a large majority. Does she ever stand a chance of getting that through the House of Commons?
Well, the reason why she does still just stand a chance is because there's nothing else that can command that majority either. So when Theresa May's deal was thought to be very unpopular, it was in a sort of beauty contest of just one thing. It was the only thing on the table, and now MPs have had a chance to vote for lots of different other ideas, and they've also not been able to get a majority in the House of Commons either. And any deal with the European Union that Britain makes with the EU is going to have to look quite similar to the deal that Theresa May has negotiated. It can't really be changed all that much. The rivals that want to try and replace people like Johnson today, they won't be able to make big changes to the treaty between the UK and the EU. So, I mean, unless Britain ends up not leaving at all, or leaves with no deal, and it looks like the government are really saying now that they're not really prepared to do no deal, prepared in both senses, in the sense that they're not prepared in terms of the machinery of the government to do it, and actually in terms of as an outcome, they'd rather have a deal with the EU, and no Brexit at all. And so that's the choice that sort of faces the UK now is whether or not we go for a sort of a no deal outcome, very unpopular, a referendum full of problems, or Theresa May's deal, which is why it's still sitting there as a potential outcome for the UK.
And what would a no deal Brexit look like? Today we've had the governor of the Bank of England in Washington telling the IMF that he thinks a negotiated no-deal Brexit, that's just leaving without a deal with the European Union, going on to World Trade Organization, WTO rules, would be less damaging for the economy than simply crashing out in a no-deal Brexit. The end result will be the same, but it's an idea of choosing which one that you want. So what would be the implications of that? Does it make any sense to have that?
The no deal is a problem because although you can manage some aspects and you can become really prepared as a country, the UK could do all it could as a country and get ready and get its ports ready for big longer queues and so on. But ultimately, because it's a two-way relationship, the EU makes some of the decisions, and there's be a huge lack of legal clarity and a huge lack of political clarity. What would the European Union do if there was a no deal? Would they do their best to make it as easy as possible for Britain? Or would people like, the French President Emmanuel Macron say, actually, we want to make this quite difficult for Britain if there's a no deal? And that's why no deal is seen as such a big problem, because ultimately some of the things that it would involve are completely out of the UK's hands, and that's why it's so difficult.
And so Mark Carney saying that at the IMF in Washington, talking about a no-deal Brexit in not necessarily unfavourable terms. He's not saying it's a great thing to do, but what he is saying is that it's a bad thing to do. That's a bit unusual, isn't it?
Well, Mark Carney, it has to try and be as apolitical a figure. He's got to try and be as neutral as possible, because ultimately he is a servant of the government. He is a civil servant, if you like. And ultimately, although the Bank of England, which he runs, is sort of an independent organisation, it's part of the branch of government. And ultimately, there could be a Prime Minister like Boris Johnson who's in favour of no deal soon. And the Bank of England will have to work with that government. So Mark Carney's position is always based a bit around the politics of all that and the fact that he has to balance these competing interests in Britain.
Well, let's turn to what British politics looks like dealing with Brexit. Is Brexit all-consuming for British politics?
Well, yeah, I think it means that nothing else can get done. I mean, the House of Commons here hasn't really achieved anything beyond Brexit at all for the last couple of years, and now it's just gone on holiday for a couple of weeks. So I think now we're in a situation where the big fundamental issues that are facing the UK are not being resolved. The reason why people voted to Brexit was because they were fed up with government and so on, and they wanted change, and they're not getting any change because the House of Commons isn't able to do any policies or make any policies, and Theresa May, isn't able to fulfil her agenda because this issue of Brexit is so all-consuming in the UK. It sort of sucks up the energy and sucks up the oxygen that could be spent on these other issues. So that means the UK isn't really getting anything done.
In internal politics, Theresa May has put that withdrawal agreement to the House of Commons 3 times. She's talking about bringing it back for a 4th time. Could she bring back a different type of deal? I know that at the moment she's in talks with the main opposition, or her government is in talks with the main opposition party in Parliament, the Labour Party, under their leader Jeremy Corbyn. What does Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party want for Brexit? Indeed, do they want Brexit?
Well, really, they want a withdrawal deal that looks a lot like Theresa May's, but they can't say so. They can't really agree to that. So they've got it's a lot of politics, a lot of sort of people trying to display their disappointment with the deal for political reasons, where really ultimately they wouldn't negotiate that much different a deal at all. What they want is guarantees that in the future the UK will have a very close relationship with the EU. But of course that's not possible. Once we leave the European Union, it's up to each individual government to make decisions about how the UK and the EU should go forward. So they want guarantees that would bind a government in future to stop a different government pursuing a different direction. They won't be able to get that. So these talks are almost doomed to failure because the two sides are so far apart and there's no real political interest in the two parties reaching an agreement. I think for the Labour Party, a lot of people that supported Labour voted to remain and are against Brexit and want there to be another referendum. If Jeremy Corbyn was seen to vote for Brexit and make sure Brexit happened, that could be a really big problem for him. And for Theresa May, people in her party really don't like Jeremy Corbyn. They think his sort of socialist politics are completely against everything that the Conservative Party stands for, and they also want the ability to make sort of expansive trade deals with the rest of the world and being really close to the European Union, abiding by all the regulations and all the rules that the EU makes, would limit the UK's independent ability to make these trade deals. So both sides have so little in common and so little political, there's so little reason for them to reach a deal that although it's potentially May's last hope, it's really unlikely.
So those talks, they've been going on between the Labour Party and the Conservative government about reaching an agreement for an EU withdrawal that could get through the House of Commons. You don't think that that's likely to result in something satisfactory that could win support in Parliament?
No, I think it's very unlikely. Also because Jeremy Corbyn, as leader of the opposition, wants ultimately there to be a general election, and wants to become Prime Minister. And it would make it less likely that he could do that if he keeps Theresa May in the House of Commons in office as Prime Minister and agrees with her on Brexit. That would stop there being this sense of, because there's this sense of crisis in Britain about the politics and about what's going to happen, and that makes a general election more likely. Jeremy Corbyn wants that sense of crisis, wants that sense of where are we going, what do? We need to have a general election. He wants that to happen, and again, that wouldn't be possible if we came to a deal with the European Union that had the support of both parties.
So you talked there about general election, and we are talking about domestic politics. If there was a general election, would it be fought on Brexit?
Well, there was a general election 2 years ago in the UK, and everyone thought it would be about Brexit. And it wasn't really about Brexit. It was about everything. It was about, economic policy and, about industrial policy and redistribution, and about things like the NHS, the National Health Service, things like that. It's possible this time we could really see a Brexit election because the issue is so vital right now. We're right at the end of this Brexit process, and both parties will have to really come to a position in a manifesto. And that might mean that ultimately the Labour Party becomes the party of a Remain and referendum and trying to reverse Brexit, because that's what their policy will decide in their manifesto. And the Conservative Party equally will have to come to a position which all of these competing tribes in their party can support. And that might mean, something that's a bit harder than what Theresa May has agreed, something that's a bit more distant from the EU, something that can get the whole of the Conservative Party on board. So you'd have two parties with very clear positions on the European question, on the question of the EU, and that could shift things, because then, voters would get a chance, in essence, to decide, do they want to stop Brexit or do they want it hard?
We had a general election in 2015. David Cameron called one and won one, and that was a bit of a surprise. And then he called the referendum, lost that, and then he quit as Prime Minister. May took over. She called a general election in 2017, expecting a bigger mandate to carry out her Brexit, and she wasn't given that. In fact, she was given minority government. This is all very unusual for British politics, isn't it? We're not due a general election until 2022. We've had two in the past 4 years. We might get another one this year, so that'll be 3 in 4 years. It all seems very unstable for a country that has a reputation for having a stable means of government and not very many general elections.
Yes, the way the House of Commons works, it's two parties, one on each side, and the party with the most seats gets to have a majority. And the way the voting system works in the House of Commons and for Britain, you'd expect there to be one party or the other that could govern in a sensible, stable way, and that's not happened. We're having this system where ultimately the two parties are getting an almost equal number of seats, an equal number of votes, and that means a lot of drama in the House of Commons, because it's not quite clear who's won. It's not quite clear where the power lies in some senses in the House of Commons, and that is unusual. We've not really seen anything like this since the 1970s. We've got to go back sort of 40 or 50 years to see the sort of the amount of division in the House of Commons among the MPs.
We've got those situation where now Brexit may or may not happen, even though we've had the date of March 29th for Brexit, and then today, which was another date for Brexit, both of which have whisked by. 3 withdrawal agreements, 3 votes on withdrawal agreements have been turned down in the House of Commons. Prospect of a 4th one when they come back. We may or may not have a general election. Could Theresa May she or may she not stay as Prime Minister? What's happening in her own party?
it looks increasingly likely that there will be a further challenge to Theresa May as leader of the Conservative Party soon.
This is from her own people.
This has been from her people in her own party, people that used to be in her government, or some people that are still in her government. The difficulty is, and I remember we talked about this at the time, there was a challenge to Theresa May from her own MPs, and she won. And she won the backing of her own MPs, and that the rules of her party, the rules of the Conservative Party, mean that there's a 12-month period where she can't be challenged. And these MPs, these senior MPs, are trying to get rid of her anyway. That will have to involve a whole number of people in her government staging a sort of internal coup, if you like. And that's difficult to do, and it gives them no guarantees that they will be able to get rid of her. So it's not clear what mechanism, how they can get rid of Theresa May and install a new Prime Minister. So that gives her some strength, that gives her some power.
So let's talk about, we're here in Westminster, but let's talk about the European Union and their view of what's going on. So they seem to be put into, they're always as the other partner in a discussion. They have some power, in some saying what's going on. So what have they said to Britain, and why is April the 12th now Friday? Why was that a significant date, and why is October the 31st a significant date? What's happened over the past week with the European Union and Britain? What have they agreed, and what does it mean?
So the European Union, throughout this Brexit process, everyone said they've been very united. They've had a united view. But for the first time this week, we saw some significant division within the European Union over Brexit, because you had Emmanuel Macron in the European Union, the French president, who really wanted there to be a very short extension. He wants Brexit to be out of the way very soon. He wants either a no-deal Brexit or no Brexit at all by June. The vast majority of the other member states wanted there to be a much longer extension, maybe to March next year, a whole other year. So then we've got this compromise position of October, so in 6 months, and that's the result of a lot of internal debates within the European Union. You know, so that creates this new cliff edge, this new deadline for the UK, and what they want to see by October the 31st is some clear evidence that the UK is finally making up its mind on Brexit, whether that's having had a general election, or whether it's talking about a referendum, or whether it's MPs finally and reversing these decisions that the government have made today and going for a no deal. They want to see a decision by October, and that's what they're arguing for.
Well, it seems as though we're not quite sure what's going to happen. I don't think anybody in Britain does know what's going to happen. We'll probably be back here again after Easter. It's about 2 weeks, when we'll be looking at the future of Theresa May and the future of Brexit. But for now, from College Green outside Westminster and the Palace of Westminster, from Dr. Alan Wager and from myself, thanks very much, and hope you have a good day.